There's always been this strange point in video game history I never really understood, that being the FMV era of games. At a time where games were usually made with hand-drawn animation, I never really understood why a studio would create some janky-looking animations with real actors. But I guess that's all personal preference. I did start looking more into FMV games after finding a small little game called Harvester. This isn't it though, this is just my Linkin Park CD. I remember seeing the box art originally, and the style and aesthetic was just something I generally wanted to know more about. I also started thinking about the release date, the genre, and the supposed amounts of gore, and it started making me think about that game Night Trap, as well as the creation of the ESRB rating system. Back in the early 1990s, there was a big video game controversy that was even taken to a Senate hearing, mainly focusing on the violence of video games and the open availability of kids owning these games. The key points were about blood and gore in games like Doom, Mortal Kombat, and Night Trap. These three were being seen as over-the-top violent and caused much concern for parents and the senators that saw them. Oddly enough, however, that third game, Night Trap, it's a bit of a unique case. It's an FMV game, or a full-motion video game, that played out like a movie with some occasional gameplay elements. These types of games were often made a lot around this time, as many movie studios thought it was the next stage in film. It was this weird short period of time where even some Hollywood actors would be put in video games just to try out this new style of filmmaking. And although there are still some modern versions of FMV games focusing more on full CG instead of real human actors with green screens, the era of movie companies having game studios was short-lived. And I feel like a reason for this was the controversy that Night Trap had caused and the many consumers not wanting to engage with a similar game. Back to the hearing, Night Trap was brought up as an extremely violent game about kidnapping and killing women, and that's how I viewed it up until recently. I had only heard about how horrifying this game was and really only listened to what people had to say at face value. However, what I actually found was that this game is nothing like what it was promoted to be, with the game putting you into the perspective of a special ops agent that needed to scan through cameras and save people in the house from blood-sucking vampires. The game was incredibly tame, with there being no actual killing or even any blood on screen. When I first figured this out, my mind was blown. This game I thought was so impossibly bad was just mild at best. And hey, even Nintendo, who claimed it was some horrid game that would never be on their platform, eventually put it on the Nintendo eShop with the teen rating. Yeah, the same rating as Smash Brothers. Crazy to think about, isn't it?
And let me say that for the record, I want to state that Night Trap will never appear on a Nintendo system. Obviously, it would not pass our guidelines.
But if you're looking for a more in-depth look at this specific time in gaming history, I highly suggest looking at this video by Madular, as it goes into a lot more depth than I was able to, and also has a lot of the information that I was able to talk about in this video. Harvester was developed by DigiFX Interactive, a studio that only existed for about 6 years, only being held together by the publisher Merit Studios, which went defunct in 1997. DigiFX Interactive only made a few games, with Harvester being their last and most famous one. Harvester had a budget of $1 million, with the game being set to release the same year as filming. But after Gilbert P. Austin, the writer and director, finished his work and left it up to the producer, Lee Jacobson, the game would take 2 years to finish coding and fully release. But once the game did launch, it didn't do too well, probably because of the poor marketing alongside FMV games being on their way out. Harvester was a commercial flop, critics saying the game was confusing, overly gory, and stupid. On top of all this, the game was even banned in Germany. Now, I'm not all that well versed in point-and-click games, but I'd still like to see just how bad this game is. So let's take a look, shall we? Starting up the game, there's this opening cutscene that feels straight out of a movie. I actually really like these old CG animations where it's trying so hard to be realistic, but because of the time period, it just doesn't. Honestly, you could take footage straight out of a bowling alley and I probably wouldn't even notice the difference. After that, you'll wake up as the man Steve, a certified big guy by some and a kidder by just about everyone. Steve's a man with a similar fashion sense to my own, who suffers from amnesia, not knowing where he is or who he is.
But I've lost my memory. Do you believe me?
Well, you always were a kidder, Steve.
The thing is, Steve does have some memory, mainly about advanced technology, like color television. You'll find out more about the town, which is called Harvest, from your mom and brother. The way that your mom and brother talk is unnatural and creates this mood of unease. Most of the people in Harvest talk in this very exaggerated, stereotypical way, which makes them sound off-putting, or at the very least insane. It works great for the style that the game is going for. It makes you feel like you're an outcast in a town of people that's so so artificial. The only person that talks normally is Stephanie Potsdam. She's your soon-to-be wife who's been locked in a room up until the wedding day. Something you'll soon come to realize is that Harvest is an odd town, to put it lightly. A prime example being the paperboy, Jimmy James. He comes around each day, but instead of dropping off the paper, he comes to collect it. One place that will get brought up a lot in conversations is the Lodge, a place that everybody says you should aspire to join.
You should be thinking about your career and about joining the Lodge.
The Lodge is this massive structure that's in the middle of town. It's so massive, in fact, that it's on every page of the map. Something I found kinda cool was being able to see it off in the distance in some locations. It just exemplifies this uneasy and sorta looming threat that the Lodge has. But without any other ideas, Steve decides that he'll join the Lodge and hopefully learn about what's happened to him. In order to do that, you'll need to fill out a Lodge application, which is the first puzzle you'll need to complete. After that, each day the Lodge will give you tasks that you need to complete. They start out fairly simple, with the first one being to scratch Mr. Johnson's prized possession, his tucker.
Mr. Johnson, he owns a tucker. I should like you to put a scratch in it.
But with each passing task Steve does, they get more and more extreme, leading to him committing some actual crimes. Or, I guess, pranks, as the Lodge guard says.
Minor pranks, really. Nothing overly difficult.
I mean, it's in character. Steve has always been a kidder, after all. The gameplay is simple enough. It's your standard point-and-click adventure game. I did have some problems, however, like trying to figure out what is and isn't interactable. Something I learned is that some objects you need to re-click in order to interact with them or pick them up. It can also take a little bit of clicking around just to find some objects. Oh, and another strange gameplay mechanic is the combination of items. This is something that's never important, only used to escape the jail cell in one optional part of the game, and building a pipe in one required part of the game. It's not really good game design to create a mechanic like this that never gets used, and then making it required in a timed section in the latter half of the game. I mean, I guess it gets stated in the help box at the start of the game, but it doesn't get used until multiple hours later. As I said before, each day you'll be given a task that you need to do. Each one is a puzzle you need to solve, which are about a 50-50 in being actually well-designed puzzles or being so out of left field it's honestly impressive how anyone was able to find the answers. A good example is on the third day whenever Karen goes missing. Finding clues starts simple, like talking to Stephanie and finding out Mr. Potsdam left angry that night, but then finding clues about where he went after that, you would need to go to the shop. Okay. From there, you figure out that you need to go to the hotel, then the graveyard, but somehow you're just supposed to figure out that you need to go to the shop of all places? And that's not even talking about the mental gymnastics you need to do in order to steal the fabric from the firefighters. First, you need to go to the school and set off the fire alarm. Simple enough, but I kind of figured it out by pure accident. Anyway, after that, you take the ladder and the fire axe from the fire station. Now here, I thought, oh, well, you know, there's that disc on the roof of our house. Maybe I need to go up there and grab it, and I'll use that to distract the dog. No. No. Instead, what you have to do is go back to your house, move the cabinet with the furniture dolly, then turn off the house security so that then you can open up the window to your dad's room and get the note so that then you can go to the meat plant and get the meat so that now you can distract the dog. Now, I had to look this part up because there is no way in hell I was ever going to be able to figure out that I needed to move the cabinet and find a secret hidden button. But those are just some of the examples of the bad puzzles, stumbling upon the answers just by chance. There are some good puzzles, like stealing the light pole from the barber shop or setting the fire. It just sucks that you have to look at the walkthrough because there's no indication of what you need to do sometimes. One good thing at least is that the game won't lock you into a dead end, as the game won't progress time until you have all the items that you need. So at least there's some comfort in knowing that the game will automatically let you know when you're on the right path or not. But to be honest, the puzzles aren't the main reason you're playing Harvester. You'll be playing the game to explore and experience the town of Harvest. The design and aesthetic of Harvester is super unique. And looking at the game now, it depicts this more unsettling, uncanny vibe that was probably not what they were aiming for whenever the game was being developed. The contrast between the 3D rendered backgrounds and the green screened in actors sets this facade of a fake town trying so hard to be seen as real, but not quite reaching it. It kind of reminds me of this one short film, Subconscious Password by Chris Landreth. Something about the mix and match of the real people and the environment of the 3D rendered locations has such a unique style. That being said, the creativeness can sometimes be a detriment. On many occasions I found myself completely missing objects objects that I could interact with and collect just because they blended in too well into the background. I think if they made it so that then whenever you hover over an interactable object, it would have a glowing outline or a sound effect, I think that would help. Or maybe do what White Day did and have the objects flash indicating whether you can interact with them or not. Just something to make the game feel less rough. But as you explore Harvest, you'll come face to face with many of the interesting locals. Each of the characters in Harvest are their own form of insanity. Each one is a caricature of stereotypical American values, such as your mom, who's the do-nothing wife and only bakes cookies for the bake sale on Friday.
What else is there for a wife but cooking and cleaning?
The thing is, because the bake sale is 5 days away, she just bakes cookies, throws them out, and then starts making more. One of my favorite characters, though, is good old Mr. Boyle. He runs the local post office and despises both the newspaper and local TV station. The way he talks about how the post office is some keeper of peace is just so great. He was also supposedly involved with the newspaper building catching fire a little while back, but who can really say? It's not like you give him back his gas canister in order to get the master copy of the Lodge application. And I'm sure it's a safe idea to have it in his hand. I didn't even finish my line before he set another building on fire. And who could forget his iconic line? Next time you post, don't forget the zip code. Another character I love is this army veteran amputee. He's your standard red-blooded American, ready to lay down his life to stop any of the commies, even if it means losing both his arms in the process. What I love about this guy is that he crawled his way back home from the battlefield and wants to be sent back in. What's more is that even the army thinks he's insane and doesn't know what to do with him. So what do? They set him up as the guard outside of the missile base with the magic red button that sets off all the nukes.
These are nuclear missiles?
Goddamn right they are. Every one of them ready to rain death on the Ruskies. All I gotta do is hit the button and blammo.
Which if you talk to him long enough, he'll start to think that you're a communist, shoot you, and then subsequently lose his balance, then set off all the nukes, sending the unsuspecting town of Harvest into a nuclear winter. As you probably guessed, I found it really entertaining just walking around and talking to all these people and hearing all their different opinions on what had happened the day before. There are a few locations that have no story relevance, like the missile base, but are still really cool to go and look around and just chat with the strangely entertaining people. One thing that's really interesting is hearing all the weird values everybody holds, like how joining the lodge is some life or death situation, but whenever a child goes missing, everyone acts like it's a crime when the child is found.
Congratulations, hero. You found Karen after all.
I also love the facial expressions and the talking portraits. Mr. Johnson has some of my favorites with these completely over-the-top expressions that accentuate the insanely obscene things that he's saying.
And Edna, well, she needs a good hard penis. Bye now.
Another little interesting tidbit is that Gilbert P. Austin, the writer and director, is actually also an actor in the game. More specifically, the hotel and morgue owner, Mr. Monahan. Just something cool I figured out. The voice acting is also really great. I can sense that slight disconnect from reality that causes the characters to come off as super uncanny. And although I haven't played it, I've heard Silent Hill 2 does a similar type of thing with their voice acting, but I feel like here it's more intentional and it brings a comedic twist to the uncanny speech. The music has this 1950s twang to it, the main melody fitting into this uncanny feeling, which gets accompanied by this haunting whistle that chimes in. The song fits the game just so well, as it has this sense of familiarity, yet this sad and dreary whine. There are plenty of other tracks as well, like the ambient tracks that are surprisingly unnerving. It would be great in most other horror games, but it's hard to take serious here with some of the sound effects that are used. You know, the fairly obvious stock sound effects. It's not a bad thing, it fits this less professional B-grade horror slasher style it has. Just can't really take the music all too seriously whenever I'm expecting a Wilhelm scream, you know. The cutscenes are also great. To me, this is where a lot of the comedy is best.
No, all in all, I'd say this was death by natural causes.
Natural causes?
You can't live without a spinal cord, son. Nothing unnatural about that.
Or some of the most disturbing.
That would enable a mother to put a rope around her baby's neck and push her into the air and jump after her.
Jeez, man, that's pretty dark. Isn't that right, Sheriff? He's taking it pretty hard. Oftentimes, cutscenes will also be placed at random points between dialogue. They'll only last a couple seconds at most, and most of the time don't really have anything to do with what's going on. But because it has to stop the dialogue, load the video, then go back to the game, it has some of these really funny, awkward pauses that are just so comedically perfect.
And we only carry the finest meat, only the juiciest cuts. Once you take over the business, you'll realize the importance of maintaining quality while cutting costs. We know what we're doing here, Steve.
Alright, I guess it's about time to talk about the last section of the game. If you, by some chance, want to explore Harvest, or God forbid, the Lodge yourself, then now is your time to leave and go to the final thoughts stamp here. Wow, that was bad. The Lodge is the final section of the game, and it's this big building split into 3 separate floors. There's a lot of creative ideas thrown around, and I think some of them are pretty good, if not a little disjointed. I do like how the Lodge feels like some distorted reality or fever dream. It's just such a cool, interesting contrast to the rest of the uncanny yet grounded world of Harvest. That being said, the Lodge is pretty ass, mainly due to the required combat. I haven't talked about the combat up until this point, but that's mainly because the combat is only used for like 1 real encounter, but now it's used in most rooms. And I bet you might be able to guess, but the combat is abysmal. You see, the hitboxes for the enemies and Steve are so ass, and as such, some of the enemies will just have longer ranges than Steve, or you'll often trade hits with them. You can use the shotgun or nail gun, but both of those have limited ammunition that you should probably save for the harder enemies that show up. It's also important to note that some of the enemies will have guns, which can be pretty obnoxious considering that they have infinite ammunition and will never stop shooting. Now, there might be a way to get good at the combat system, but for most of the time you'll just swing your weapon around like a doofus, and wouldn't you know, that works. Kinda. I highly suggest saving before entering any new room because there are plenty of unfair fights, not enough healing items, and even a few instant death situations. And while we're on the topic of saving, I just want to say the save background is pretty cool. I like it a lot. It's pretty cool. Another thing that happens often is the enemies canceling their hit animations just to do another attack, or Steve slowing down his own animations for some reason. This game's old and it has a few bugs like this, but the combat bugs specifically can be super obnoxious here. So yeah, the whole lodge is one big gauntlet with some puzzles thrown in, and man, these puzzles are ass. Almost all of them are ridiculously stupid, with none of them really having any hints. One of the first puzzles you'll encounter is Steve gets some toxic sludge or something on his clothes, so you need to get the money to go to the cleaner. But in order to do that, you need to go to the western bar, take this specific bottle, then fight the mirror you, so that then you can get the bar key and get the $5, so that then you can get your clothes clean. And all of this is under an invisible time limit where you'll just die after a certain amount of time. And there are multiple sections like this. I guess it just reinforces the excessive saving, I guess. I don't know. The third floor of the lodge is this weird social commentary section, but each one is super disconnected from the others, and I can't really take any of them seriously with how little time is designated to each of them. I will say, some of them have some of the most disturbing imagery, though. Ugh. Like the janitor room. Oh god. I can't even watch as Steve so haphazardly walks over the janitor's hard work. Ugh.
All right, buddy. You asked for it.
There's only one social commentary that gets a lot of focus, and that's the subject of video games and violence in media. This actually ties into the ending of the game. Once you make it through the lodge, you talk to the Sergeant at Arms, and he explains that Harvester is a VR game created to test Steve and see if he becomes a serial killer and joins the Harvesters. But the last test for Steve is to see if he's become so desensitized to murder that he's willing to kill a real person to leave Harvester. Or will he get married to Stephanie and live out the rest of his life in Harvest? These are the only 2 endings, so I'll talk about both of them. Saving Stephanie does exactly what you'd expect. You'll get married, raise a kid, and live in Harvester until you die. This whole part is a fabricated reality, as the real Steve only lives for a few moments. It also has this section where the Proctors talk about moving back to the old-fashioned form of making serial killers. Books.
There's gotta be a better way to develop these serial killers. This is scientific. We should go back to the old way? What old way? Good breeding.
The other ending has you kill Stephanie, and then escape the simulation. Steve then hitches a ride and kills the kind Samaritan. And then it plays this whole ending meta-commentary sequence where Steve is talking to his mom about the game Harvester and violence in media and how it's bad. I mean, violence is so bad they even removed it from the Roadrunner cartoons.
Roadrunner cartoons. Roadrunner cartoons?
Now, I think this section is making fun of how ridiculous the idea is that video games can create serial killers, but then there's also parts earlier in the game that demonstrates that TV violence causes a sense of dissociation, so I really don't know what the message of this game is. Honestly, what I think is really interesting, the topic of media violence being brought up at this time in this format. Like I talked about earlier, the game Night Trap was used in the Senate hearing as a key component in the video games and violence case. It could be a coincidence, but I feel like this game was created to point and make fun of that whole situation. I mean, your ticket into the lodge and escaping the simulation is ripping out someone's spinal cord, which was a line used against Mortal Kombat in that hearing.
Pulling off the head of the opponent with spinal cord attached.
Maybe it's trying to be a reference, but I don't know. I could be entirely wrong about this whole thing. But I do think this game was made as gory as possible to really disgust and make the player feel uncomfortable. And knowing this, I think it makes the decision make a lot of sense. It reminds me of that one movie, Funny Games, right. I haven't seen it, but I know it does something similar. So, what are my overall thoughts? It's an interesting game, truly a unique and weird game. It's unlike anything else I've played, that's for sure. And it definitely feels like a thinking man's game. Unfortunately, I'm really not that type of guy. There are many messages that get thrown in recklessly, but I think the message that it really wants to drive home gets enough time. I genuinely don't think this game could exist in any other time other than this exact moment where the tension with video games and media violence were at its highest. It's hard to say whether I recommend playing this game or not, but it is really cheap on Steam, especially whenever it's on sale. But it does require a walkthrough to the side that you'll need to use whenever you are well and truly stumped. But if you do plan on playing this game, I highly suggest not using the walkthrough for as long as possible so that then you can feel accomplished at times. And hey, if you don't want to do that, then maybe go and watch a long play or let's play, I don't know. The stupidly comedic characters as well as the over-the-top gore and absurd premise is something that I can only imagine from a B-grade horror film. And honestly, having something like this in a video game space is just really cool. But more than anything, it's taught me specifically something. To not be so reductive towards game genres just because I'm not all that familiar with them. And this is actually important for the next game I'm going to be talking about. But that's for another time. So yeah, a little weird game to finish out this Halloween season. Yeah, these were supposed to be Halloween specials. I'll try and get them out next year on time. How about that? I know I already want to do a video on White Day 2. That might be a while, though, considering that I gotta get a system that can run it at better than 10 FPS. So, anyway, that's about it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have yourselves a great rest of your night.